We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood. I got the crud. We break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. For those that have been listening for a while, you know this is not my normal voice. Hey, I'll take advantage of it for now. My wife thinks it's sexy, but a little cruddy today. Dr. Justin Romano joins us. He himself, his kid brought home a little bit of crud, so we can just be cruddy together. Today. Tis the season. Tis the season to be cruddy. But we have brought Dr. Justin Romano on the show today to talk about cell phone addiction, smartphone addiction, and how it's just completely, the impacts are quite terrifying that it's having on the world right now. We're going to dive in. We're going to come out with some strategies that can help you, parents out there, help your kids with how much screen time they're getting, as well as yourselves, because it's got to start with you if you're a parent. But that's my version of this. Justin, mate, welcome to the show. Give us a little bit about yourself and we'll get started.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Brandon. I am super excited to be here. I am originally from Cheyenne, Wyoming. I did medical school at University of Washington in Seattle. I did my residency in adult and general psychiatry at Creighton University. My child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship also at Creighton University. And then I just started a job as an outpatient psychiatrist in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I have an almost 9-month-old baby and an amazing wife. And I like to ski. I like to bike. I like to, play music, do a little singing and songwriting. And that's a little bit about me.
Wow. Renaissance man. And you forgot to mention possibly one of my favorite TED Talks. In fact, that's how we got here. I was on my way to work out one morning, and it's about a 20-minute drive. So it's like perfect TED Talk time. Mm-hmm. And up pops Justin's and how smartphones, this new addiction, relatively new, right? We're talking just the past 16 years.
Yeah.
And it stopped me in my tracks. I could not stop thinking about your message, how well you presented, and how relevant it was to me in my life and how I use my cell phone. And now as a parent, preparing to raise children into a world where they are completely surrounded by screens, devices, and distractions. So I feel like I've got skin in the game to learn something about this and be a part of this conversation. So I'm grateful that you're here. And for those listening, check out Justin's TED Talk. There'll be links in the show notes. So let's kick things off. Addiction. Addiction seems a little extreme, right? When we think about our simple, benevolent little device that lives in our pockets. And when addiction comes to mind, you think heroin, you think other substances, gambling, porn, but not necessarily algorithms, little zeros and ones. So, mate, you've got an active practice. You're working with a lot of children and teens. What does addiction look like when kids are coming in and you start to identify, oh, you use your phone 9 hours a day?
Yes. This all started becoming very apparent to me how big of a problem it was when I was in my fellowship and I was on my inpatient child psychiatry rotation. So the kids who are suicidal, the kids who are severe depression, manic, psychotic, all that kind of stuff. And it seemed like so many of the chief complaints that kids were having when coming in were parents took cell phone away and became suicidal, or parents took cell phone away and kids had major meltdowns, so angry that they couldn't calm down. They needed to come to the emergency room and get a shot of an antipsychotic to calm down, which is wild, I know, to think about. But it reminded me a lot of people who were addicted to drugs, who, if you try and take their drugs away, they panic because that is their lifeline. That is what they need to survive according to their own brains. That's what addiction does. It rewires your brain into thinking that drug is the only thing you need to survive. Everything else comes second.
Wow. So you're seeing this, kids that are actually considering self-harm and requiring that degree of medical attention because their phones were taken away.
Yeah, and there were cases where it was somewhat of a manipulative strategy, where it was like kids saying, "Hey, if you take my phone away, I'm going to kill myself." And there were others where it's like literally situations where kids, their only connection to the outside world, especially during COVID, was their phone. So if you took that away, they felt like they had no way to connect with other people. They felt like they were isolated and alone, and they got more depressed and suicidal.
Wow. You know, that's interesting because I'm sure many of those parents were probably from the outside looking in who weren't raised with that kind of technology, right? For them, it was Atari. Like that was like, boom, it was a head explosion. What? Pong and Pac-Man. And then now kids have the world at their fingertips. They have there's more technology in a smartphone than there was in the Saturn V rocket. And so, yeah, it's this sleeping kind of giant in many ways in how it's impacting kids' lives. And I'm sure parents were thinking they were doing the right thing, yet who knows how many kids out there have gone ahead and hurt themselves or replaced it with something else once it was taken away, right? So you did a great job of explaining in your TED Talk how kind of evolutionary biology and dopamine, plays into this. So you do a great example of, hunter-gatherers and how they would find dopamine. Set that up and how that also relates to cell phones now.
Yeah. So a lot of our brains, what we think about our brains, like how we think, how we plan, that's actually not a lot of what your brain processing does. A lot of what our brain does is all subconscious. And it tries to alter our behavior and get us to do healthy things through the release of dopamine. So say you have a caveman or someone who is just a hunter-gatherer, and they come across a new food source. And in the TED Talk, I talk about like a big bush of blueberries. And so if you eat those blueberries, it's good for you. You get a lot of nutrition. Your brain will release a lot of dopamine to make you feel good about that find. So that dopamine makes you feel good. As we know, dopamine is a feel-good chemical along with serotonin and some other ones in the brain. But it also really increases the drive to do that same action again. And that drive is the important part because it's the drive that makes you do the things over and over and over again. So in the hunter-gatherer, they were like, okay, I had a great food source in that blueberries. It helped me survive. I'm going to keep going back to that. I'm going to keep trying to find more blueberries because it made me feel good. And I've got this inherent drive to do it again now. But in today's world, there are so many things that are trying to trick your brain into releasing dopamine without actually being good for you, which is kind of the basis of drugs and addiction.
Mm. And social media has mastered dopamine release. TikTok especially. They've found the perfect amount of time and rewarded the perfect kind of message that tells that brain, green light, proceed, swipe, 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 swipe. And I'd be intrigued to find out, on average per sitting in front of TikTok, how many swipes occur just to the next video, the next video, the next video. That'd be an interesting one to find out. But so that makes sense then. So our phones now and the apps that we use have been designed to keep us hooked. And an interesting fact I'll throw in, Coco Melon. You're becoming aware of these shows, Justin. And might I say, or lean you towards Bluey. Coco Melon is cannot stand it, but Bluey is phenomenal. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I've got a bias because it's an Australian television show.
Yeah,
but Coco Melon found itself in hot water because they were caught using the same technique as TikTok. It never stays on one frame more than 2-3 seconds. It jumps, it changes frame, and that keeps kids hooked because the scene's changing. Whereas I don't know if you grew up with like the Wiggles or Bananas in Pajamas. It was just one frame. Everything was happening from one angle. Very little camera angle changes. So there wasn't that much of a pull to keep watching other than the great content that was being delivered. So this happens in many different areas. And we can see now, just like the Food and Drug Administration had kids knowingly getting addicted to sugar from the moment they're born. So just thought I'd throw that one in there for my tinfoil hat wearing listeners out there. It's everywhere.
But you're so right. I just did a podcast episode on my podcast, Millennial Mental Health Channel, about how our attention spans are changing so much. It's hard because we haven't really been measuring attention spans for decades and decades and decades. But yeah, a lot of media is trying to have things as short as possible. Even the average scene in movies these days is less than 3 seconds, the average cut. And so everything is trying to hold our attention more, get us to pay attention to the movie, get us to pay attention to the commercials, so that we focus more on the technology and not actually focusing on our lives.
Mm. There's got to be something to be said around this about the need to escape, right? That any addiction, right? I like to listen to Gabor Mate, and he brings up some really interesting stuff, that any addiction has to be linked to some form of trauma, some form of negative sensation, experience, or feeling that we don't want to go to, look at, deal with. And so I would rather use a mind-altering substance or experience or receive stimuli that switches that off, that switches or turns down the noise at least. So it makes sense that kids now who go through, I mean, do you remember high school, middle school? It was a gauntlet. It's a mental health gauntlet. It's tough, man. I went to all boys private school, and it was great school, but dude, there was some really toxic behavior going down in a place like that. And that's just kids figuring themselves out. But I see where the need to retreat from those negative experiences might arise. And it's like, yeah, I got this perfect distraction tool right here in my pocket. So do you think that there is something to be said about this next generation coming up, having a real aversion to just dealing with negative feelings?
I think so, yes. It's like having a drug on you at all times, because we essentially put our smartphones, our cell phones in our pockets, and we have it all the time. And even think about yourself. If you're in an awkward situation at a party, how many times do you pull out your phone to look at it to make it less awkward?
I just peel the label of my beer. I guess that's a little old school.
Yeah, that is old school. Which
I see it all the time. You can tell. I mean, I know body language pretty well, and I can generally see that looking at the phone is accompanied with a couple other displays. So that makes sense. Yeah.
And in child psychiatry, in child development, it is really important to have conflict resolution, to have conflict with peers, to have interactions with peers. Yes. And I do think that this is becoming less and less with the use of social media. I mean, yeah, you have Twitter wars and things like that, but you're not actually resolving anything. You're not building those skills. It's on average, according to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, teenagers are on their phones about 9 hours per day. And if you're on your phone just distracting yourself, you're not building those skills. You're not learning how to conflict resolve. You're not learning how to communicate. You're not learning how to deal with the stresses of life. And boy, is life stressful. And so I notice a lot of kids, they don't have hobbies. They don't have interests. They don't have coping mechanisms. What they tell me, I say, what do you do when you're angry? Oh, I look at my phone. What do you do when you're sad? Oh, I look at my phone. That becomes the default. That becomes the thing that they use the most to regulate their own emotions and feelings.
Well, and that's probably why we're seeing a lot of kids with pretty low emotional intelligence coming up, because they don't have proper self-regulation strategies, nor the awareness to go, until they have a conversation with yourself and they go, oh, when I feel angry, I go to my phone. Like, it just becomes this habit. I mean, I remember many phases of life where with my phone, I wake up, my eyes are barely open, and I've done the 7 keystrokes to get me into whichever app, unlock the phone, without even knowing what I'm doing. It's just like a pure habit, including the cool, phone flip as it comes out of my pocket. Like, the body is very easy it does a great job of creating these habits, right? And so working with my addiction, like, it takes work. But bringing it back to these kids now that are trying to avoid these negative feelings, and they're not getting that outside interaction. one of the beautiful things about being out in the world in life, especially as a kid, like it's really important as a kid, if you ask me, because this is time where you learn boundaries.
Hmm.
You learn that you can't just get away with saying a bunch of junk, or like you can online, where you have some form of safety, a barrier protecting you. But you say that stuff at school, see what happens. See what happens, right? You say that harmful thing to someone, someone might jump in and stick up for them and call you out for, the inappropriate way that you're behaving. Yet a lot of kids aren't getting out.
Hmm.
They're not being out in the world. They're not practicing those skills. They're not saying those retrospectively stupid things,
Yeah.
which we need those experiences, right?
Hmm. Yeah, you totally need those experiences, or at least in our perception of how the world should be. I, I, I always think about, is our world going to change to the point where people are growing up so much on their phones that it's just going to completely rewrite what are the norms of society?
Yeah,
That's possible too, but I do think
sure.
that conflict resolution, that face-to-face stuff, and studies have shown this too, that's what makes you happier. That's what makes you a more complete human being. You're more curious. If your life is primarily on your phone, you do have more shallow interactions. You do have more loneliness and less connectedness to other people. You have these superficial interactions and you have superficial connections, but those deep in-person connections tend to be what actually make you feel better and feel like you're connected to your community.
So my question, Justin, is how can we ensure that man's search for meaning is mandatory reading for every kid in the United States? Because
Oh man.
what are his principles? It is find something bigger than yourself, a purpose bigger than
Hmm.
yourself. Surround yourself with people that love and care about you enough to hold you to it and support you in the attainment of that goal. And look at resistance in a healthy way. Understand that life is full of resistance and challenge and traumatic experiences, and look at how it's serving you.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I actually just read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, or listened to the audiobook because I'm actually not a very strong reader.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, in order to make that mandatory reading, we just got to book ban all the other books. That's
We
the
got to book
American way.
back. We got to burn them. We got to burn them. Yeah,
We got
no,
to,
yeah, that happened once.
yes, we got
A
to
couple
goose step
times.
to our libraries and burn those books, baby.
Yeah,
Hopefully, no one takes that clip out of context there.
no,
But
that was a complete joke. Let's make that really clear. Um, but there's because I think perspective, right? Here's a bloke who survived Auschwitz.
Mhm.
Who survived immeasurable trauma. Auschwitz or Dachau. I'm mixed up between the two right
I
now.
think he went to both. He had to a
He went to
couple of different. He got transferred.
transferred,
Mhm.
yeah, and still was able to, on his way to work on a rail line in shoes that didn't fit, with almost
Yeah.
frostbitten toes, was imagining the lecture that he was going to present
Yeah.
on this on his experience and his topic. And this is in no way, I think, of this is in no way saying that feelings aren't real, because I
Mhm.
bet you that kid who ends up in emergency because their phone was taken away, those feelings were as real
Oh
to
yeah.
him or her or them as someone experiencing something else, right? But the perspective, right? The lived experience, the
Mhm.
awareness that your feelings are real. How do we communicate or connect with these kids to go, but it's just a flipping smartphone?
I know it's a piece of technology,
Yeah.
but I want to build on that point of I see a lot of young people who are already nihilistic, 14, 15 years old, and they think the world's going to crap, everything's terrible, politics are garbage, there's nothing to live for. This world is not a good place. And in a way that can be true, but
Isn't that just the
social
emo phase though?
yes,
That's the angsty, My Chemical Romance phase. Like,
but you can still have positivity and, like you said, that logotherapy, believing
yes,
in a higher power, believing in a higher purpose.
purpose, yeah.
And what social media does is it puts the most extreme perspectives in the limelight. It doesn't show you the Facebook post of someone saying, I can see both sides. I like Republicans and Democrats. It shows you the guy who's going to be the most extreme. It shows you the people arguing. It shows you the negativity of the world, kind of similar to the news, because that's what gets human attention the most, the negativity. And when kids are on their phones for 8 to 9 hours a day and they're surrounded by that negativity, they lose that hope that humanity can be something greater. They start to get really negative and feel so much that there's nothing to live for, nothing's ever going to change. The world is a terrible place. And that hopelessness also contributes to mental health issues like depression and anxiety.
True. So true. Yeah, and I definitely found myself getting swept up in that in the 2020 election.
Yeah.
I was so hungover from all that mess when it was going on, and coming out the other side, it's like I didn't want to hear about any of it because it got whipped up so much to be so catastrophic, and it makes sense. Like there's a reason why the Andrew Tates of the world get so much attention. Whether it's the people that follow him and enjoy his stuff or the people that are calling him out for the ridiculous nonsense that he says and throws out there, it makes sense that he gets the most views and clicks and awareness as opposed to someone who even assertively presents a positive message that's generative, that creates discussion, that invites people in to have that discussion. No, it's very absolute, black and white, good and bad language that people then feel like, okay, well, there's a binary. I got to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
And completely identify with that thing.
Exactly. And I see a lot of parents who put limits on phones because this is becoming more of an awareness issue. And a lot of times kids are like, well, why? I don't get it. Why can't I just get what I want all the time? And it's because it's not good for you to get what you want all the time, because what our brains want is that sensationalist, is that anger, is those strong opinions, is those big charismatic people telling us that we should be homophobic, misogynist. Like that stuff is what kind of our brains go to naturally. And we have to be able to tell ourselves, no, we have to restrict this stuff. We have to be mindful of it so that it doesn't poison our brains.
And that brings up a great point. Whereas when there is an absence of positive, healthy role models in the world, irresponsible, unhealthy role models will very quickly step up and claim that space.
Exactly. Like especially if those irresponsible role models are selling you something.
Yes. Yeah. Bingo. Right. Using marketing language, persuasion.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Or manipulation techniques. So this in many ways, as a parent now, and hoping to add a couple more to the pile, it gets me thinking. And unfortunately, I have enough role models and life experience to learn that anything my kid gets into and whatever, they're their own human. But as a caretaker, as a parent, I have to first take ownership and responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I could blame school curriculum. I could blame the teacher. I could blame their friends and whatever. But at the end of the day, who's their key role models?
Yeah.
Mum and dad, right? In this scenario. And so how many of these kids that you've spoken to that have had their phones yanked away, that you've then had to have a conversation with their parents and go, yo, guess where they learnt it from? Because already Bindi is fascinated with my phone. Guess why?
You're on
it. She can tell that I am, because I'm on the bloody thing. Of course she's fascinated by it, because I'm on the bloody thing.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the question, how many parents do you have to speak to them and go, guess what? It's not just your kid who needs to do the heavy lifting here.
That is a really tricky thing, because in child psychiatry and working with parents, you want to keep a good rapport, a positive outlook. And we do talk about limits. And overall, parents have been pretty good about setting limits for kids. But a lot of times parents come in and say, like, you fix my kid. You tell me what I have to do, but I'm not going to make any changes. And parents don't understand.
We give him everything. He has everything he could ever want. But why is he so unhappy? So you're not empathizing with your kid and you're not looking in the mirror, right?
Exactly. And I've even heard kids say, I love the question of, you have 3 wishes. What do you wish for? And it always breaks my heart when kids say, like, I wish I could spend more time with my parents. And, I've got young kids, 10 to 16 years old saying that they wish they could spend more time with their parents. And even the average parent is on their phone for 3 to 4 hours a day. So imagine how much you can do with your kids if you just were able to cut down on your screen time and spend more time with your kids.
That's really powerful. That's really powerful. I want to look more structurally now at this addiction. You do a great job of kind of presenting that we got 16 years now that these smartphones have been introduced and that we've had access to them. 97% of Americans have them. Up to 50% claim to be addicted. There's 9 hours a day on average that teens are spending on these phones. 3,000 deaths a year on the road can be attributed to distraction from cell phones. Sexual predation, right? The amount of teenage girls that are being asked for nudes. Don't think it's happening? You say it very well. Ask any teenage girl if they've been asked, right? Or been told to kill themselves. Yet, in the DSM-5, which is, you can explain it better than me.
It is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's kind of like psychiatry and mental health's Bible. All of our diagnoses come from the DSM-5.
And it is not in there. Cell phone addiction is not in there yet. Getting sucked into a jet engine has its own little space in there. Why, Justin? Why? Why aren't mental health communities or mental health advocacy groups aren't pushing this?
There's the $1 million question. And I think it's multifactorial. There's a couple of different things going on. I was shocked because they just released a new version of the DSM-5, the TR, text revision, about a year and a half ago. And I thought, oh, for sure, they're going to put something in there about social media or smartphone addiction. And there was absolutely nothing. And I was looking at old articles from like 2013 to 2018, and there's still people just arguing the basics. People arguing like, oh, this is more of an obsession, not an addiction. Like, this is just something that, people just need to figure out and not. It's just people arguing semantics instead of taking this really seriously. Right. So there's always been pressure that's prevented us from getting the basics down. We don't have a solid definition for this. We don't have solid objective measures that people can fill out to give us an idea of how addicted they are to these things. And that the COVID and the pandemic was a major catalyst for all of this stuff. So I think after COVID, people are starting to see, and even I am seeing it in myself, and which is one of the reasons why I started taking this more seriously too. COVID was a catalyst, and people started to say like, okay, maybe this is more of an addiction instead of just something that people use casually. And so I'm hoping now that people are taking it more seriously, and it does seem that way. But for years and years, it was such a new thing. Smartphones have only been around since 2007, and it took us a while, and it took a little bit of arguing for people actually to say, okay, we do have to take this seriously.
Yeah. And it sounds like there needs to be a multifaceted approach, right? We need our mental health experts and those who have access to or influence on this DSM-5 to kind of wake up to it. I mean, in no way likening cell phone addiction to PTSD from combat, but the amount of combat veterans that came home from Vietnam and there was nothing in place to support them. Nothing in place, or very little in place. And there was so much shame around having bad, negative feelings from being in combat. That doesn't make you a man. It makes me think of that powerful scene in in the movie title. I can't remember.
Rambo?
No. That's a great example. Patton.
Yeah.
Patton.
Oh, yeah.
When Patton, I think they're in Sicily, and there's a troop there who's clearly got PTSD, and he's like, what's wrong? And he goes, my nerves are shook.
Yeah.
And he berated him because he had a serious mental health problem because of something he'd experienced. And yet we didn't have the awareness, I guess. We didn't have the awareness.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the code. So I guess we're just hoping that we're seeing enough of these issues and just crossing our fingers, or are there active things we can do to bring the awareness, to bring it into the zeitgeist that smartphone addiction is a real thing?
Yeah, and that's why I did my TED Talk, was to try and get awareness up about that. And you brought up a really good point. So much of our society's default is blaming the individual before blaming anything else. You look at addiction. For years and years, it was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, that person's making the decision to be an addict. You look at PTSD, it's like, oh, they're making a decision to have behavioral problems after war. And
Sexual
so
assault.
yes, blaming the victim. And
Yeah.
so it takes a while, and it takes awareness and changes and definitions and official societies, medical societies saying like, oh, no, no, this is actually a real thing that
Yeah.
these people have fallen victim to change it, and to change the narrative so that it's no longer, oh, you just need to make better decisions. It's okay, how can we support you and make systemic changes to make this better?
I wonder how much of it is kind of a dissonance between generations, right? Because I'm sure it was very hard for those that were raised, during in the 30s, right, when the economy was just going to crash, the Depression era generation. I'm sure it was very hard for them to relate to their boomer kids who wanted to
Yeah.
grow their hair and dance in a field, right,
Yeah.
naked in mud. I'm sure they had, trouble understanding what was happening socially and across the board. Could that possibly be a case where maybe some of these mental health professionals themselves are going, this next generation, this next generation is going
They're
to think
soft.
the crap. They're soft. They're, like, I'm sorry, gumption and bootstraps doesn't work for everyone. There's not going to be a 17-year-old who's trying to build their social cred at school and trying to get followers and likes and all the rest that's going to, in their own state, go, I'm going to put this down. This is impacting my negative health in a negative way, and it's going to impact my ability to strive and get dirt in my nails to achieve things. No.
Yeah.
And if so, that's super rare. We have to set up things structurally to support them.
Exactly. And like you said, there has never been a problem like this ever in history. In my TED Talk, I talk about how, like, the telephone took over 100 years to democratize, where most people could actually use it. And in 15 years, the smartphone went from nobody having it to 97% of Americans having it. It came on so strong and so fast. We were caught up in somewhat of a whirlwind. And now we're finally starting to settle down and say, like, okay, we're seeing that it's leading to depression. It's leading to anxiety. It's causing body image issues and an increase in eating disorders. We're starting to see what is the consequences of our actions. And it's not good.
Yeah, no, it's not. You brought up a great point when we were chatting before we went live that I asked you how many, are we blaming things like anxiety and depression and, slapping labels on kids and writing scripts for them to take their pills when really we're not looking at the root problem, the source. You and your function, like in what you do, you will, but many general practitioners who will write a script aren't looking at things like video game addiction and withdrawals coming off from summer. You gave an example where kids have behavioral issues and they spent the entire summer spending 12 hours a day in the dark.
Yeah,
games.
playing video games.
Yeah.
Very true. And it's hard to know what is what, because a lot of times there are multiple things at play in those cases. And there are not a lot of studies so far that have showed us, we have studies that show a correlation. So we know more video games, more screen time, more social media correlates with worsening mental health, but we don't know the causation stuff. So I have met kids who play 10 to 12 hours of video games during the summer. They're used to that. That's what they're doing every day. They've got these high dopamine, high intensity video games. And then they drop into school in the fall or in the autumn. And all of a sudden their routine is completely changed. They're not getting nearly as much as that dopamine. They have somewhat of a withdrawal, and they have bad anger issues. They're irritable. They're having more anxiety and depression too. And so it's hard to know what is what. But yes, you made an excellent point that people didn't train thinking about this stuff. Most psychiatrists, most therapists don't ask you, hey, what is your screen time? How many hours a day are you on your phone? How many hours a day do you play video games? And that is a big factor that a lot of practitioners miss just because they're not used to it, because it is such a new thing.
Yeah. Wow. So, yeah, I remember Guitar Hero came out And I came out of a 2-month summer pale. And I grew up in Australia. I came out pale, but man, could I rip that fake guitar. That digital audience was just craving more Brandon.
You are the Eddie Van Halen of plastic guitar, my friend.
Oh, Mark Knopfler, more accurately. But yes, but anywho, yeah. I mean, that was I'm sure I was 15, so I'm sure I was a shit to deal with. My parents are probably like, oh well, at least we know he's not doing drugs. He's just playing this thing in front of the screen. Yet little did they know, it itself was having the same reaction as drugs would be.
Yeah.
The tech industry. This is we have so much to thank it for, right? We have so much to be grateful for with tech and what we have now, like, you know, the functionality of a smartphone. Look at apps like Life 360, giving parents and people the ability to keep track of one another, make sure they're traveling and moving from A to B in a healthy, safe way. So there's so much we can be grateful for. Yet these same companies have their finger on the pulse of how the algorithm is going to impact our behaviors and how we interact with our phones and social media. I mean, these phones are designed to keep us hooked. So, friend or foe, right? Are there ways we can hold them accountable? Are there ways that they can create, I don't know, what incentive would there be for a company that is funded, that has, you know, vested parties that want to make every little cent they can out of the technology that's been created? Where's the incentive for them to create something a bit more healthy?
There is none unless we force them to. And yeah, you make a great point. They're there to make money. They're tech companies. This is a capitalist society. That's what they want to do. That is their end goal. And they'll do it in any way or any means necessary, in whatever efficient way possible. And so luckily, the Colorado Attorney General just opened up a lawsuit with, I think it's 40 other states plus the District of Columbia and their Attorney General to hold Meta and Facebook accountable and say, hey, you know this is bad for kids. You know it's addictive. Yes. You're not making any effort to change it or make it better for kids. And it's getting even worse. So similar to the smoking pandemic, because that's I think the probably closest thing in history that has happened, and a good example of how we were able to hold tobacco companies accountable. We sued the shit out of them. And that's how we got change. Unless you hit people in their pocketbooks, it's not going to make a difference, because what's their end goal? Their money, their pocketbooks. So you have to hit them where it hurts in order for them to make a change. And Facebook actually just came out and said they're really disappointed that society is going about the way of litigation instead of working with Facebook on making this better, which is just a joke. It's a farce.
Oh my God. Okay, so that, I got to give a shout out to Australia, because when I tell my cigarette smoking mates how much a box of cigarettes cost in Australia, it blows their minds. $20.
Whoa!
It's $1 a cigarette. And mandatory. Every single pack of cigarettes has a photo of a lung that's just full of tar, has a child that's been born premature and hooked up in the NICU because smoking during. Public service announcement. Do not smoke cigarettes when you're pregnant or around your pregnant wife or partner, because it can cause serious issues in the development of your child in utero. So I'm not going to smooth that one over whatsoever or finesse that one. But Australia has made that very clear, and they tax tobacco like you wouldn't believe. Alcohol as well. Alcohol is very expensive, and there are noticeable differences in what we're finding in cases of lung cancer and various other cancers. So yeah, there's something we certainly can do, hope to do. Yet that's the macro, right? We have, fortunately, people like the representative in Colorado who's stepping up and kind of leading a charge like that. Thank goodness. So I guess the call to action is to find out more about that, support them. Because I'm sure they're giving calls to action and how they can be supported by getting kind of public support. Yet it sounds like we can't get away from individual ownership, individual, like you and yours. your behaviors, your addictions, your families. You got to take ownership. You got to do the work, right?
Totally. And there are some things that you can do that can help. You can set screen time limits on your phone, and there are
Yeah.
lots of different apps. They come built in on the iPhone. They don't come built in on the Android, which I think would also be a huge improvement and make a lot of progress. You can try and reduce as many notifications as possible, because the less notifications you have, the less you're drawn to your phone, the less you pick up your phone.
I can preach to that. I don't get a single notification from social media except for LinkedIn, and that's professional purposes. And
Yeah,
it's made a huge difference. And
totally.
Facebook notifications are just stupid. It's like, oh, wow, my racist uncle who drinks a lot just posted. I do not have a racist uncle, by the way. But that seems to be like, Facebook just seems to be like a place for like really pissed off, narrow-minded old people these days. But
It's becoming
well,
that.
it's becoming that. But notifications, like, yeah, and I shout out to the ClearSpace app that it forces you to leave the app before you even get in, take a massive breath, gives you a little quote to read, and then gives you an option. Do you want to proceed or not? And if not, if so, then how long are you going to be on? You can set a time limiter and it kicks you out.
Oh, I
It
like
kicks you out.
that.
So I used to open Instagram, God, who knows, 30, 40 times a day. I wouldn't track, but I would assume
Hmm.
I'm averaging 2 times a day.
Nice.
And it's usually just to post myself,
Yeah.
something myself. So I was amazed that an app could have that kind of impact.
Totally. And I deleted Facebook off my phone. I still have my account.
You can do it on
And
your computer if you want.
yeah, I can use the computer if I want. I check it maybe once every 2 weeks. And I used to be on it for up to an hour per day because that was the limit I had set on myself on my screen time app. So there, in and of itself, is, 7 hours a week that I have now to do other things, to play guitar, to write music, to write poetry, to work, to be with my son, to be with my wife. And so those little changes can go a long way. My screen time went from about 3 hours per day average down to about an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours. So just getting rid of Facebook made a huge difference.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, you shared in your TED talk, it was like 3 to 5 hours.
Uh-huh.
So you've really got it down. Yeah, I'm at about 2 hours and 15
Yeah.
on average per day. And that's usually YouTube, trying to like TED
Yeah.
talk or listen to something. I'm not done. I still get caught up in the other nonsense and mess. I'm not trying to say that I'm not not falling into the traps myself.
And
Well,
like
Justin,
any addiction, it is a moderation thing too, where a little bit of wine, totally fine. A cigarette once a year or a cigar once a year, probably totally fine.
after some great sex, why not?
Exactly. So a little bit of phone is okay. A little bit of YouTube is okay, especially if you're using it for learning purposes. So I always like to just try and say, like, I'm not being black and white and fatalistic about it. Like, we got to get rid of all this stuff altogether. That is unrealistic. But we got to learn how to use this in moderation. We got to learn how to use this in a healthy way early now while it's still young in the grand scheme of addictions so that it doesn't get worse and worse.
This is great. I feel like I'll always love aspirational identities, right? If I join your program, I'm going to go from this to that. Oh, I want to be that, right? And so credit card companies have a name for users that have never paid interest, right? Because they don't make money on anyone that doesn't pay interest, right? And they're called, I think it was deadbeats. And it's like, yeah, I'm a deadbeat. Yeah. Well, no, I was not a deadbeat till I met my wife. Thank goodness. She's the financially responsible one between us. But yeah, like I want to be a deadbeat. Love it. I'll be the best deadbeat possible. And I wonder if there's a way that we can kind of create an identity around how can you use social media? You're going to use social media, not it's going to, absorb, infiltrate, possess you.
Yeah, good point. Because like even with drugs and alcohol, like with kids these days, it's straight edge. Like if you're straight edge, you're against doing drugs and alcohol. So there is that identity aspect of it. So let's make up something right now. Let's think of a good name here.
It's a fun game.
A disconnect, a disconnector.
Disconnect.
No, it's too long. It's too clunky.
Uh, something with social, that you're actually like social media. The irony of it is it's incredibly not social.
Yeah. You're an in person. You're more into being in person than
In
online.
person. In person. Ah, man. All right. Well,
It's
I think
something.
this is a call to action to the listeners out there.
Yeah.
To shoot one in, and I'll make sure that Justin is aware of what we land on. But yeah, like I want my kid. I'm really amazed. A friend of mine, he had his daughter really young. He was 20. And so she's 16 now.
Mhm.
And gorgeous girl, like red, like complete scarlet red hair. And she went through a phase of wearing braces. And kids at school were like, oh, brace face, metal mouth on whatever. And she responded to them. And I think this has a lot to do with how candid he is as a person. He probably raised her in a very candid way.
Mhm.
She's like, yeah, I'm going to have straight teeth for the rest of my life. Sure. Okay, cool. Cool story, bro. And she just like give him a thumbs up. And I was like, that's how I want my daughter to be. That's how I want my kids to be, that they can just fly above all that nonsense, all that
Mhm.
BS stuff that we see online and all the rest, that she can be like, okay, someone just messaged me to kill myself, or that I'm this or that, and just be like,
Yeah.
cool story, bro. Like, I know me. I know me enough. I know what fills my cup. I'm self-aware. I have self-management strategies when I feel certain emotions, and I'm not going to get caught by this stupid like rhetoric that you throw my way or comment. So that's my ambition, and I guess I have to model that for that to be the case. I can't just wish that into existence.
Yes, and that takes, in order to say that, to have that confidence in yourself, you have to build your identity of self, right? You have to know who you are and know what you want, to not be affected by other people's opinions of you. And what I worry about is that kids are spending so much time being told who to be, being told what to
Yes.
be like, that they're not really, they're not building their sense of identity. They're not building their senses of self. I asked a young person the other day, like, what do you want out of life? Like, what do you want to be? Like, what are 3 things that define you, describe you? And this young person we sat there for 15 minutes and they could not give me a solid answer, which is scary.
Yeah. Well, and not unsurprising. They're teenagers, right?
Yes.
It's not unsurprising because, like, I personally believe the 20s, late teens and your 20s are a time to just try on everything. Try on different, like, personas and blah, blah, blah. Because who's coming out of their teens, in a lotus pose with their third eye fully open, right? But at least, like, you have 360 degrees of options to look at. What's like the 20% at this phase of life, right? Like, what is just what pulls you forward? What pulls you, in a sense? And yeah, the fact that they can't even land on one thing is scary.
Yeah.
Really scary. Well, mate, I want to ask you, it's the final question before we wrap up. I see, I have this in my hand here. Is a magic wand. Right? This is not just any magic wand, Justin. This magic wand, once I give it to you, when you wave it, your vision, your mission for the work that you do gets enacted. So, hand out. I'll give it to you. There you go.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
Beautiful. Ooh, it's heavy.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite it's girthy, quite girthy. So you get to wave this wand. Your vision has been enacted. What does the world look like now?
Oh man, do I have to say bippity boppity boo or abracadabra first?
Mate, you can do whatever you want. It's your one now.
Ooh, my one now. That is a tricky question, because yes, I would love to shake this magic wand and to have young people not suffer anymore, not have worsening mental health, worsening suicide rates, worsening eating disorder rates. I wish I could just fix all that immediately. I wish I could fix all the trauma in the world, because like you said, we reach for addictive things because we are trying to distract ourselves from the traumas that we have been through. So I think, yes, if I could wave my magic wand, I wish that children wouldn't have to go through horrible, horrible things and traumatic experiences anymore, because that's the toughest part of my job, is that vicarious trauma of having to sit in the trauma and sit through the terrible things and listen to the things that these kids have been through. And it shocks me every day, the horrible things that kids have to go through in this world. And here we are giving them a drug that they carry around with them every day that prevents them from thinking about it, that prevents them from processing their trauma and makes them worse over time. And so that's another reason why I'm pretty passionate about this.
Clearly, mates. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for who you are, how you're turning up, the way you're connecting with these kids. And a lot of these kids are rural too. And so they're very misrepresented across the board with what all kids are going through, right? There's kind of blanket statements. So I think it's phenomenal what you're doing. You're supporting your local community. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor. And I'd love to have you back on at some point to keep this conversation alive. And along with that, thanks must go to you guys, the listeners. You guys make this show possible. We really appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this conversation. We want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your experiences with smartphones. If you would consider yourself to be addicted too, and if it's impacting your kids' lives as well. So, mate, how can we keep track of you, find out more about you? I know we have the Millennial Mental Health channel is your podcast, which we'll have linked in the show notes. Where are some other areas that we can keep up with your good work?
Yes, the podcast is probably the main one. We put out a new episode every 2 weeks. I do it with a buddy of mine who's a therapist and who also works as a school therapist. So that's probably the best place. Yeah, check out the TED Talk. It's called Smartphones, It's Time to Confront Our Global Addiction. It's from TEDx Omaha. The podcast, you can get in touch with us through our email address, which is millennialmhchannel@gmail.com. And I'd love to chat with you guys in the comments section too. Give us your name for someone who wants to disconnect or unplug from social media, your ideas. Let's come up with a term. Let's do this. Let's change the world.
Yeah, let's change the world. It starts with one kid at a time, mate. You're doing that. Appreciate you. Lots of love for those that joined us live. Grateful for you, sir. Until next time, I've been Brandon Clift. This has been the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. See, I just needed to warm up. I just needed this conversation to warm up. I finally got to nail it.
And the voice is oh so smooth.
Oh so smooth. Yeah, I've been Morgan Freeman, and this has been the Mankind. Lots of love, guys. See you next week.
This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your host, Boyson Hodgson, and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.